Yes, we're really doing this. Instead of starting with happy politics, yeah, that's we're doing this. We're having a pandemic early election, and that is why you have the joy of seeing, or perhaps hearing, myself and Jordan on a Monday BC Poly Hot Stove. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I am joined in a socially distant manner by.
I'm Jordan Bateman, VP Comms for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, and I was for a long time a fall election skeptic, but John Horgan has plunged us into the polls during a state of emergency, during a global pandemic, for the reason of amendments to a law.
Yeah,
What?
it's funny. It's kind of what I had been told they might seize upon as the reason to do this. They hinted that, well, the Greens introduced some amendments, and so that means this government is unstable. And I mean, there's a lot of ways you can unpack this. I do want to give a shout out to, and I've forgotten who it is. I apologize, but somebody pointed out pretty quickly that one of the ones they brought up, Carol James immediately spoke in favor of in the, in the legislature, which was
The author of Instability, Carol James.
indeed, yeah.
Well,
Horgan
here's the
was
thing.
asked about-
I was having lunch with, I don't think he'd mind me saying, James Moore, former MP, today. Chris Gardner and I were having lunch, and James was like, hey, do you know what these pieces of legislation were that are so egregiously amended that, and honestly, McLean, I couldn't remember. Chris couldn't remember. James doesn't know. If the three of us, who are pretty keen political watchers, don't know, what hope did the guy across the way in the restaurant have? Like, it's crazy.
Well, there was a few, depending on who you ask. Today, Horgan mentioned something about the Clean Energy Act, but then even Ned said, well, that's, differences of opinion, that's fine. The one that got him really set off, and this is interesting, was the Mental Health Act change that would have allowed doctors to hold young underage people suffering from addictions against their will for, I want to say, a week.
Right.
And that was... first of all, that it was the Greens and the BC Liberals who prevented that from happening, and that was kind of the deal breaker for him. That was like, well, this is just too important to stand. But I mean, that was probably, of all the bills that didn't go the NDP's way in the last session or even the last year, that's the one that you can make. That's the weakest case. I mean, that was one that met with some pretty wide revulsion from, stakeholders, the chief coroner. A lot of people that said, this is not a good idea.
Didn't the child and families
Exactly.
rep? So let's call a spade and cover your ears, kids. It's bullshit. Like, it's honest. It's another lie from a guy who's just torn up an agreement. It had nothing to do with that. That was an act that. Like, if you're a science-based government, evidence-based government, and your children and families rep and the chief coroner saying, no, this is the wrong path to take, well, of course they're going to amend it. Of course they're going to oppose it. Like, you're in the wrong, not the BC Liberals, or certainly not the Green Party. So I don't know. Do you want to take it like press conference by press conference, McLean, and talk about these guys?
We should do that. I mean, let's start with the way we'll do it in the order they happened today,
Sure.
which was NDP, Green, and then BC Liberal. And we've already started sort of talking about the NDP press conference. And to me, what I thought was what I thought was interesting is it still seemed as though, to our previous point, the NDP hadn't quite settled on the why.
Yeah.
Now, again, we've talked about this before. The why is obvious. Everyone knows the why. It's that they think they're ahead in the polls by such a margin that whatever they do, it almost doesn't matter. And that's also why I think they're moving so fast. Like, they just can't believe their own information, and that's why they've made some mistakes in nomination races, because it's haste that you're seeing.
Right.
But they can't say that.
No.
That's not a reason for any government to go to the polls, especially during a pandemic. So they kind of came up with two things, and Horgan kind of switched between them. One was what we just talked about. Well, the Greens, they weren't really great partners. They switched some bills. They dared to introduce some amendments. Those tricky Greens. And the other one was just sort of a little more broad. Well, we need stability.
Yeah.
Neither one of them really works, but I sticking with one probably would have been better.
Yeah. So I watched this feed on Global BC. So I don't know what, my understanding is there's a pool camera, so everyone's feed looks the same. First of all, weird location.
Yeah.
There was garbage cans behind Horgan. There was a lawn, which is fine. And then there was, I think it might have been a lacrosse net or something kind of, I'm not sure, a rusty old lacrosse net that looked like it's seen better days. Maybe it was Horgan's house. I have no idea. He likes lacrosse. I can't picture him out there flicking his, shots in, but whatever. It was not like it was like a backyard, but you couldn't really see the house. Like, it was an odd choice for staging, but when you're rushing stuff, you make mistakes, as our friends at the Public Affairs Bureau, whatever the hell they call themselves these days, GCPC or whatever, did last week when it came to briefing the media on, $1.5 billion bailout plan. So, that was a little bit weird. I thought, Horgan, Horgan made some kind of stuff that is easily cut into campaign ads for the BC Liberals. For example, he threw out a comment there about how, I think it was Lisa Eustace, God bless her, who came out and said, parents are upset about schools, and they say they can't get information out of your office, out of your government, and now you're sending us to the polls. Is that really what you want to do? And he said, well, it's not the job of the Premier's office to make sure that education runs safely or smoothly, or something to that effect. And you know what? If I'm the Liberals, I'm pulling that out. That's a ready-made ad. I'm blasting that into Facebook, into every parent's feed. The Premier of this province says it's not his responsibility to make sure your kids are safe in school. Well, it is. If it's not, get rid of your Ministry of Education and let's save $6 million, which I'm not proposing, but or $6 billion. Of course it's your job. Of course it's your job, and this is the problem, right? When you have an election during a pandemic, you're falling down on your number one job, which is to keep British Columbians safe. And go ahead.
I was going to say, that was actually not the only time. That was something the Premier did a couple times today. It was, I guess we should just start calling him the NDP leader.
Yeah.
When there was a difficult question, that was for somebody else to deal with. The other one was Nathan Cullen and the situation in Stikeen, in which the NDP's equity mandate says that a retiring white male MLA, Doug Donaldson, needs to be
male.
Exactly. Yes, you're right, and that is important.
Yeah.
Needs to be replaced by someone in an equity-seeking group, which basically means not a straight white male. Now, there is a Indigenous leader who says that she's filed her papers.
Yeah. And isn't going away.
Yeah. No, not going away, to her credit. Yeah. Even though she's still, loudly singing the praises of this NDP government, which, she's playing the game well. Nathan Cullen was on Mike Smith this morning. He said, I'm not stepping aside. I'm the rightful candidate. And John Horgan was asked this pretty directly, and he said, well, that's for the party brass to deal with. I'm not,
party president.
Making it sound as though he really had nothing to do with it. The party that he leads. What?
First of all, can anyone name the president of the party of the NDP? I can't. So, convenient scapegoat. Can you?
Craig Keating.
Oh, well, aren't you? Is it still Craig Keating? I thought that changed.
I think so. I better be right now.
You're special. Let's give a hand to Maclean for pulling that name out of thin air. That's why he gets the big bucks. That's why I'm just in a ivory tower in Metrotown, and he's on the ground with the people. Okay.
In my living room.
In your living room. Okay, so first of all, he blames this thing. But second of all, last time I checked, the party leader signs nomination papers.
Indeed.
So, again, it's another symbol. He's signing a paper. It's another symbol of an agreement he's tearing up, a lie he's told, and this is going to be a problem for John Horgan because, we can transition now to Sonia Furstenau. I thought her press conference was the best press conference I've ever seen Sonia Furstenau give. Now, I'm not, tuning into every Sonia Furstenau press conference. I'm going to level with you. But I thought she walked the line of righteous indignation, sadness, and all right, this guy's made his bed. Now we're all going to be forced to lie to it, but here we go. And I thought she did a very good job. And for her, this campaign boils down, it's pretty simple, right? John Horgan promises something during a debate. How can I believe you, John? You've torn up so many agreements, you've broken so many promises. How can I believe you, John?
I agree with you. This was the best I've seen Sonia Furstenau. Yeah. And I asked her this question. Did you get a heads up? Nope. The Green Party, the Green Caucus, that has supported them through thick and thin for 3.5 years, didn't even get a listen. We're doing this, just so you hear it from me.
The Green Caucus,
which would have taken 30
who
seconds.
Made John Horgan premier. Let's not forget, John Horgan didn't win the last election. Christy Clark won the last election, had more seats, had a bigger vote, close but won. It was the Greens who went behind, dumped Christy, went to John Horgan, said, you will be the Premier of British Columbia, signed the agreement as individuals, every single one of them, including John Horgan, and said, we'll go right through to October 2021. We want you. You're the guy. And he stabbed her in the back. In fact, didn't stab her in the back, stabbed her in the back and the front. Like, stabbed her both. And, she met with him on Friday and tried to talk about it, said, you still have our support very clearly. I guess she should have met with Janet Austin, the Lieutenant Governor, instead, maybe. I'm not sure if she takes meetings, but, you can just drop by and say it, but you should have at least tweeted her. Anyways, and Horgan, first says, Horgan never said he was going to call it, and was still mulling it over, or, I took him at his word kind of thing. And then, boom, here we are, 48 hours later, an election's called. And, that's another sign, like, it's not a great look for Horgan. Greg Lyle, right around in the middle of that press conference, put out a slide from Innovative Research, pulling out some data about the BC voters. And essentially 55% of BC voters said, now is definitely not the time for an election. Another 30% said, I don't know. And then 13% said, no, good time for an election. And I would submit that, I would not consider all 13% of those folks who say it's a good time for election to be NDP partisans. There are certainly some BC Liberal types who, it's always a good time to get rid of John Horgan. It's always a good time to get rid of the godless socialists. That's their words, not mine. They're at our gates. The hordes are at our doors. And, what better time to get rid of them than today?
Yep. I read that book.
but still, it's like, more than half of British Columbians, I'm not sure you get more than half of British Columbians to agree the sky is blue anymore. Well, not the last couple of weeks, to be honest, but smoke. But
the other quick thing I want to mention about Sonia Furstenau's press conference today, because I agree with you, this was actually, she did a great job walking the line between, being sort of that righteous fury, but also not sounding, unhinged. She was asked a question basically saying, well, how can you be against this election when you guys just had a leadership campaign? I mean, isn't that kind of the same thing? And her response was great. We just had a leadership campaign because we didn't have a leader.
Oh!
That's not the same thing.
Nope.
So she's in a social media and Zoom campaign, which will probably be studied for generations. Snappy answers like that for things like Twitter are absolutely crucial. And I mean, I will be the first to say, I would have thought that would have been something of a liability for Sonia Furstenau coming into this campaign. But I mean, she did well today.
Yeah. And plus she gets the added delicious benefit for her of kicking Dr. Weaver in the nuts, and that's never a bad thing because that guy certainly thinks very little of her and his.
They are not close friends. Let's put it that way. No longer close friends.
I have a theory about Dr. Weaver, none of which is polite to say in real life, so I will not say it on a podcast. But no, he's forced to do it. So they were forced to have a leadership race because he wouldn't stick out his term, and of course, you do what you got to do. And to the Greens' credit, they completely changed that. I mean, there was no in-person campaigning. They paused it for months. They didn't really want to do it. But, if they hadn't, John Horgan would be walking into this election with no Green Party leader.
Yeah, or Adam Olsen is the interim leader, which is, no comment on Adam Olsen, but to go into an election campaign with an interim leader is, that's not good for anyone.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about the Horgan press conference? Not to put on my Shannon Waters so bitter so sweet hat, but that's her Twitter handle. Interesting choice of reporters who got questions. No Vaughn. I found that interesting. No Fletcher. I found that interesting. Black Press being a big party. I'm not sure there was an NL radio question.
I didn't hear one.
NW gets kind of covered off because they partner with Global, but there was no pure NW question. Interesting choice of questioners by the Premier's office, or I guess the NDP press people.
It's all party comms from here on in. We can't blame or get upset at GCP at all for this kind of thing. So it'll be strictly. Yeah. And my understanding was some reporters there in person. Also, first of all, were there some reporters there in person, or was it all? That was my impression. It sounded like Dirk Meissner might have been there in person, but it was hard to say. It was, for those of us in the media, this is super inside baseball. When we get the media advisories, it's all just dial-in info. Right. We don't have we're not given, yes, we can watch on Facebook if we have it all set up, but for me, speaking for myself, it was all an on-the-phone experience. I had to see the Horgan visual with the garbage cans in the background was on Twitter. So you're listening live and went, oh, really? That's what they picked?
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah, not even a compost sticker on it or anything like that. The one thing I'll say about First Snow, the one very small misstep she made is she shouldn't have done it in the Rose Garden at the Ledge. The Ledge should remain apolitical, and it's more important than ever in this COVID campaign where already the NDP are violating the rules of how to deal with, separate the partisan from the public service. Just go across the street. Like, just go to the Grand, whatever. Let's, move it across the street would have been better. But, Greens, they don't think that way. I don't think so.
I don't think that was I think that was probably just an innocent oversight. And again, it's not their haste that's causing
totally
all this.
Not. Yeah. Then we go to Andrew Wilkinson. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, you know what? I was of the three press conferences, this was the one that took the most different tack in that Wilkinson spoke fairly briefly off the top, sort of outlining his case against why we're having an early election, and it's everything that you'd expect. It's that John Horgan broke his word. Why are we doing this? We have a stable government for a year. Nobody wants an election, and he spoke for maybe 2 minutes, and then introduced sort of a literal panel behind him of a selection of, and I don't know the number off the top of my head, I want to say 12, 15 BC Liberal candidates who are up and ready to go. It was a different take. It's actually, I thought it was interesting for two reasons. First of all, it's nice to see that one of the parties is trying to think about ways that they can do what will essentially be called probably the Zoom election, but also, underlining that they're as ready as they can be, and that's they have a lot of candidates lined up because I'm sure that people will be thinking that both the BC Liberals and Greens have been caught off guard, and to some extent that will be true, but they're not completely caught off guard. They have candidates lined up, and there's been a steady trickle of announcements coming in all weekend and all today.
Yeah, that's a good point. I thought he did the right thing by emphasizing that he was a doctor,
Yes.
trained doctor. He is in practice medicine for a long time, but definitely a doctor. I think that is a unique skill set. Listen, if you're going to create a candidate, a person, he's got a little bit of the Hillary Clinton problem, which is he's like the most experienced person, or the person whose resume best fits this job in the history of British Columbia, right? Like, what do governments do? They do three things. They run healthcare, they pass laws, they run the bureaucracy. Well, this is a guy who, was a doctor, was a lawyer, was a deputy minister. So, he's led all three. He's better equipped than anyone else in the history of the province to step into that leadership role. Is he the guy in this campaign you'd most like to go for a beer with? No. Is he the guy, so I see some kind of similarities to Trump Clinton, right? Like, well, you'd rather go for a beer with, not now, but most people now, if you want to go for a beer with Trump, is to punch him in the nose. But, let's go back, to 2015.
The argument made at the time
was, you'd rather have a beer with him. He he gets the people, he hasn't been in the Washington bubble as long, all these different things. You can make the case. Like, Wilkinson could run a campaign and say, like, what's wrong with being smart? Like, being smart would have helped the United States out pretty damn well in the last 4 years. Like, it would have been better to have someone smart in charge. So, by being being able to rely on, to lean on that experience and those resume points, it'll help him. He's not as charismatic as the other two. He's just not. He's not pithy. Like, he's not going to pull off the clever line. Someone said to me, well, I felt like, the press conference might be, a little bit long or whatever, was kind of the issue. I'm like, no one's watched that press conference. It's about pulling two quotes for the tops for the story, for Rob Shaw's story, for Vaughn's column, for, Baldry's hit. Like, that's what it's about. Can he deliver one or two good quotes a day? Of course he can. Of course he can.
Yeah.
So we start to look at it like that. The other thing is, I would submit that, the NDP are in a race to run in this election because they are 22 points up in the last public poll. Chances are, if 55% of British Columbians are very unhappy that there's been an election call, that a bunch of those are BC Liberal folks who are going to come home to the BC Liberals. A bunch of those are centrist voters who are like, I got to punish this guy. He's not taking seriously my concerns. So, let's say the next poll shows Wilkinson down by 10 or 11. Well, still a commanding lead for Horgan. But all of a sudden, Andrew Wilkinson can say, we've cut this lead in half in the first 3 days, and now we're on our way, and momentum is building. And, the traction starts to build, right? When, I don't buy for 1 second that this is a 2-day story, as the NDP keep passing off. It's been 2 weeks already. and the media did not seem any less disenchanted with the idea than they than they did 2 weeks ago. Like they were mad today. They did not want to do an election. They can't believe this guy is doing this. They don't see the point of it, and that filters out in their commentary, in their Twitter, in their way they're going to cover this election. And we're going to see, Dr. Bonnie is going to talk in 8 minutes. There will be, 350 cases, as Keith Baldry spitballs over the last 3 days. There'll be another 3 or 4 outbreaks, case outbreaks at various schools, day after day after day after day after day. And every day those numbers come out, the media's going to tweet out, why are we doing this campaign? Why are we in the middle of this? And God help if any of these parties, like if the NDP or any of these parties if someone comes down with COVID within their campaigns.
Yeah. Because that will lie squarely on, one party.
Yeah.
It won't matter. Like to your point, it won't matter if it's the BC Liberals or Greens. It's like they're not choosing to be there. So the fault is pretty clear. You're right. I mean, let's say I'm gonna throw a hypothetical at you. Let's say you are an NDP supporter who is largely happy with the way the last 3 years have gone, and you think that the polls broadly reflect the way things ought to be. Barring some pretty huge mistakes during the campaign from the BC Liberals and or Greens, those polls are not going to go up.
No.
Because we're already starting with, a net negative, which is going to an early election. As no one seems to want this. The polls pretty clearly indicate that. The other problem is that everyone knows the reason for going is not what the NDP are saying.
Yeah.
And so even if you've decided to sort of make your peace with it and say, well, whatever, I still want them to win, but, obviously that's, to coin a phrase, bullshit. It's not going to increase the polls. It's going to create kind of a little steady undercurrent of, throughout this campaign. And as I say, I'm not making this up. I have received a lot of messages from people that I do know personally, to be fair. Not strangers messaging me, but people I do know who either work for government and or the NDP and or just people I know in Victoria who are committed NDP supporters who are saying, this is crazy. Yeah. I'm really disappointed. And, most of them have said, I'm still planning to vote NDP, but I'm really, really disappointed.
Yeah, imagine being told for years that, you need to put and certainly in the last few months, you need to put partisan stuff aside. You need to do what's best for British Columbia. We're a team. We're going to work to Team BC. And this is how the quarterback of that team acts. Well, you and I have watched enough football. We know that big ego quarterbacks generally don't stick around for long. Like they get moved on pretty quick because people get tired of their clown show. Casey Printers, can I say that out loud? But it's just it doesn't happen. All weekend I was talking to folks. There was some Jack's back playing fall ball, my 10-year-old. So, I actually, got to talk to real human beings at a real baseball field, socially distanced, of course. And all of them were saying the same thing to me, like, he's not really going to do it, is he? He's not really going to call this, is he? And, yeah, you're going to turn on your news tonight. He really did it. He really did it. And he's putting a lot of things at risk. And yes, he's got lucky in that Carol James isn't running again, so he can leave her as the caretaker. She's not going to do anything publicly. She can't. It would be highly inappropriate for her to do anything. But at a time where Dr. Bonnie is saying, "Oh, stick to 6," 6 people in your social bubble. Thanksgiving is coming. We have no idea what her rules are going to be around that. What if she thinks that she needs to go to the Doug Ford rules, right? Like no more than 10 people in a house, period, end of sentence, no matter what. These are going to be big problems. So I don't know. It boggles my mind that he's decided to do this. And I just think for him, it's just like, what it was. There's two questions I have mainly. What was coming down the pipe that is so scary to him that he doesn't think he'll be in the same position a year from now, or in a winnable position a year from now? And number 2, what do those 7 cabinet ministers know or have experienced with Horgan that in an election where they're up by 22 points, they feel the need to bail out?
To your first point, we can guess what's coming down the pipe. We've talked about it. We talked, when we read some of the publications coming out from people like the Business Council of BC, there's a lot of businesses that are on the brink. Yeah. And are facing a lot of trouble. The 1.5 billion rescue plan is going to leave the tourism and travel industry pretty much sunk.
Yeah.
It's just
Well,
not
but they're
enough
getting
to
a
get
task
through.
force. They're getting a task force.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, it's
whole task
ridiculous,
force.
and it's something that, I mean, this is a Canada-wide statistic, but apparently 60% of restaurants are going to go out of business before the end of the year. I mean, things are going to get bad, and they're going to get ugly, and the federal money it's kind of run out. We're not going to be able to do lockdown again. So there's a lot of things like that coming around the pike and maybe that is the coming tidal wave that they're afraid of. And also maybe things like they've realized now that like the overdose crisis, the wave of crime, especially in Vancouver and Victoria, I mean, people are really getting sick. And eventually, the longer this lingers on, the blame will roll uphill. That's just the way things work. So maybe that's what it is.
He's not responsible to keep schools safe. I'm sure he's not responsible to keep our streets safe.
That's true.
You know what? I haven't been downtown for quite a while, downtown Vancouver, and we went down today. There is a noticeable uptick in homelessness in the downtown core. It's never been great, but coming out of the Granville SkyTrain station, I was stepping over several people, feeling terrible every time you do it to get to where you got to go. And that's one small portion of the overall concerns about poverty, about opioids, about mental health, about homelessness, about addiction, all those different things. Some of them cross over into the same circles. Other of them are separate issues, but it hasn't worked. This plan hasn't worked. Whatever Horgan's been doing the last 3.5 years, it's worse than ever.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the undercurrent that you get, I saw it here in Victoria. It was actually in response to a BC Liberal poll where one of Victoria's city councillors, basically the poll was saying, the crime is rising in the cities and we need to do something and, add your name and email if you agree, that kind of thing. And one of Victoria's city councillors saying, this is a terrible, this is driving a wedge, this is a dog whistle, and how dare you even bring this up? I think that the backlash to being told that you're a bad person for even noticing that, your car window's been broken, or, that there's, your door ringer is covered in, filth, that there's tents across the street, there's garbage blocking my favorite pizza place, or something that happened to me. Or when I met a friend last week downtown Victoria, she was telling me she was chased off a balcony, a patio rather, by two really aggressive young guys who were like screaming at them that they were going to kill her. And this happened. And this is downtown Victoria on Government Street. And that this is just kind of normal now. And everyone is just expected to say, well, it's fine. And you're a bad person for acknowledging it, much less wanting it to change. And so eventually the cognitive dissonance is going to be an issue and people will push back. And you just hope that it won't be ugly when they do.
Yeah, like America.
Yes, exactly.
The other thing is we're not doing so hot on COVID anymore.
No.
Like despite all the, I think most British Columbians were as a badge of honor. We were the best jurisdiction in the world. We ain't even the best jurisdiction in Canada anymore. We're not even like in the top half of Canada anymore. We are, other than Alberta, have the highest per capita active rate in the nation. So, what are we leaning on here? Like, okay, yeah, we trust you. We trust you, Dr. Bonnie. Dr. Bonnie ain't on the ballot.
No.
So
though the NDP will try and make it seem as though she is.
Yes, she's only in all their election ads. She's not on the ballot. But this is problematic for them as well. So all these different things. I thought for sure over the weekend, Horgan would, toss and turn one night and be like, you know what, it doesn't feel right in my gut. And he's such a guttural politician. No one's going to accuse Horgan of being an intellectual, he's smart, but he's not like this. He doesn't live in his head.
Yeah.
He's a lead from the gut leader. And his gut, I think is probably let him down here. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he'll hold on. He certainly has all the wind at his back in the polls right now. Certainly, he's, loves to pat himself on the back for being, the most popular premier in the country. But that was before our COVID numbers were sky high.
Yeah.
The highest they've ever been. It was before he called a campaign in the middle of a pandemic for no other reason than they hold power.
And I mean, to that point, I mean, there's not a single quote or moment I can point to, but my impression from all three of those was that he seemed a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He seemed a little, you could hear it a couple times where he'd say, well, this is a tough decision. I believe him that it was. I do. Mm-hmm. But I think he's landed on the wrong one. And I think there's a part of him that deeply suspects he may have he may have been wrong as well. Not just for, actually risking people, but my God, imagine if he loses this.
Yeah. Well, it's Adrian Dix.
How will you go down in history?
And like snapping at Lisa, I reject the premise of that question. Hey, you're the premier. Your job is to accept every question. I hate to break it to you. And that wasn't even the hardest question to get in this campaign, pal. So if you're already starting to get under your skin, get ready, buckle up. I would just like to, maybe in conclusion, can we just talk about the mechanics of a mail-in ballot for a second?
Yes.
Because having been one of the few British Columbians to lead a campaign that won a mail-in ballot, but who's counting Bill Thielman? It's really just Thielman and me. Let me tell you, I have some concerns over this idea. Elections BC apparently has been informed to be ready to have at least 30% of the votes come in by mail-in ballot. This is virtually impossible to do in 4.5 weeks. We heard the Premier today trying to slough off the Nathan Cullen question as, well, or I think it was one of the other ridings, maybe Alice Ross's riding. You don't have a candidate here. Boundaries to Maclean. We don't have any NDP candidate.
Yeah.
Who are we supposed to talk to? You tell us that, who's going to be on these Zoom calls? Who is it? Tell us who to talk to. And he said, well, we'll get everyone nominated, and there's, the deadline is 2 weeks before the vote. Okay, so you have to have, 2 weeks before the vote, you have to have your actual candidates in. How the hell do you print mail-in ballots in time to capture the people who are actually running for office based on the Elections Act? BC has only ever used mail-in ballots in the case of the strictest emergencies where people are out of the country, or there was a very narrow sliver of people who would ever do it, who could do it. Now, let me tell you. So TransLink, 11 weeks of mail-in voting. It was long, too long. I think the HST was around that period of time. I think that's where they got the model from. I think that Prop Rep they may have shortened to 9 weeks because they realized 11 was crazy. That is more than twice as long, and sometimes 3 times as long as the writ period is going to be. So if you need a mail-in ballot, and it's not proactive. What they did is they printed a mail-in ballot for every single person who could possibly vote and mailed them out to you. It's not proactive here. You got to find your chief electoral officer. You've got to request a ballot. That ballot has to be put in the mail by Elections BC, delivered to your house. You then have to fill it out. You then have to do all the right envelope things, and the envelope company will make lots of money, as they always do in these things, and you put it back into the mail to get there by the specified deadline. That is going to be very difficult today. It would be very difficult to do in 32 days. Mm-hmm. Are you having to do it within 14?
That's not possible.
How can you print a ballot if you don't have an NDP candidate? Are you going to really send out mail-out ballots that have BC Liberal, BC Green? No, of course not. You've got to wait until the nominations are done. So I don't understand the structure of that. And in the middle of that 2-week period, by the way, it's a stat holiday. It's Thanksgiving. So there's no mail delivery on Thanksgiving Day. So, there's another day that kind of comes out of that calculation. So all of this goes on, and you're a bit like, mail-in ballot, do I think there'll be more mail-in ballots this time than ever before? Of course. There's only been a sliver ever. But there's not going to be a ton of them. Just percentage-wise, there's no way they hit 30%. Unless I'm wrong, which I could be. Have I lost you, Maclean? Are you there? I have lost Maclean K. See, this is what happens. So Maclean is still looking at me. He cannot hear me. I am now talking. This is kind of amusing. What could happen? What trouble could I get Maclean and I into? Anyways, let's cut it off there. Thank you for listening to BC Poly HOTSTOVE. We'll be back later in the week with another one, and we look forward to talking to you then.